On the morning the Turners realized their still was gone, the Ozarks sounded wrong. Not louder, quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just withheld. Like the hills were holding their breath and waiting to see who would make the first mistake. A thin fog sat in the low ground, shoulder high, turning the pine trunks into dark pillars. The creek ran cold and steady, making the same familiar sound it always made, but even that felt suspicious, like a metronome counting down. Then the first flashlight beam found the copper. A crescent-shaped shard, bright as a coin, half buried in clay at the water's edge. Not dropped. Pressed in, smeared with mud, like someone wanted it discovered. A second beam swept over the bank and stopped on boot prints. Too many, too fresh, too heavy for a casual walk. And a third beam, slower now, drifted toward the brush line where the ferns had been crushed into a dark, wet mat. That's where the deputy saw the man. Face turned away, body angled wrong, still in a way the woods never are. He didn't rush in. He didn't kneel dramatically. He just stood there, letting the fog dampen his sleeves, and listened to the creek as if the water might explain why a stolen still had suddenly become a dead body. In 1987, in that part of the Ozarks, people didn't call it a crime scene. They called it a message. And everybody already knew who the message was meant for. The Turner clan. Content warning. This story involves violence and death, described with restraint. Because what started as theft, one copper still lifted from a hidden hollow, would become the story locals still told in lowered voices years later. The Ozarks Moonshine Massacre of 1987. 14 men. A list that began as names on paper and ended as empty chairs, closed curtains, and a county that never quite relaxed again. And at the center of it all, a family that treated copper like survival and betrayal like an unforgivable language. The Turners and the hollow that didn't exist. The Turner place wasn't impressive. It didn't need to be. A weathered house set back from the road, a couple of outbuildings, a smokehouse that always carried last winter in its boards, and a yard where dogs slept with one eye open. If you drove by, you might not notice anything worth stealing. That was the point, because the thing you couldn't see, the thing that mattered, was tucked into a fold of land where fog gathered like a secret and sound didn't travel far. The still. Copper pot, hand-hammered, its belly polished by years of care, a cap that fit tight, a thumper keg scarred from use, a worm coil that sat in the creek water like a metal serpent, quietly turning heat into profit. People who romanticized moonshine liked to talk about rebellion. Out here, it was simpler. It was math. When the mill cut shifts, when the logging work slowed, when the bills stacked higher than the firewood, moonshine filled the gap the modern world left behind. The Turners didn't brag about it. They didn't sell to tourists. They moved quiet. They sold to men who didn't talk. They ran their still like a craft and guarded it like a bloodline. The head of that bloodline was Rafe Turner, late 50s, thick hands, eyes that didn't waste expression. He had the kind of stillness that made younger men lower their voices without being told. His wife, Lillian, ran the house the way a good foreman runs a job. Steady, efficient, quietly fierce. Her kindness had edges when needed. Their son, Cole, was in his 20s and carried a restless kind of pride. He wanted respect, but he also wanted to prove he deserved it. Their daughter, June, moved through the world like she was always listening for the second sound behind the first. June noticed the details other people missed. A stranger's boots, the smell of a cigarette brand, the way a man looked at a locked gate. And then there was Wade, Rafe's nephew, older than Cole, calmer, a man who'd learned that surviving the Ozarks meant patience more than strength. The still belonged to all of them. Not legally, not on paper, but in the way the hills belonged to the people who understood them. That's why, when the still disappeared, the first reaction wasn't shock. It was insult. Because you didn't steal a still by accident. You stole it because you thought the Turners wouldn't answer. The morning it went dark. It was June who found the first wrong thing. Not the missing copper. The missing smell. She took the deer path at first light, moving with practiced steps, boots landing on stones that didn't shift. She expected the faint sourness of mash, the ghost of smoke near the firebox, the warm metallic tang of copper that had worked all night. Instead, she smelled wet leaves and cold rock. Nothing living. Nothing brewing. June stopped above the hollow and listened. No crackle, no hiss, no drip. She went down anyway. The hollow looked stripped, not just looted, stripped like someone had timed it. Mash barrels tipped and emptied, their insides raw. Rope ends cut clean, a firebox circle cold and scattered, as if someone had kicked it apart. And the still itself, pot, cap, thumper, coil, gone. June stood there until her breath stopped fogging, and her mind finished translating what her eyes were already screaming. Somebody had touched the heart of their operation. Somebody had walked in with knowledge. Because the hollow wasn't obvious. It wasn't near a trail tourists used. It wasn't visible from any road. You found it only if you were led. Or if somebody talked. June didn't run back to the house. She walked, controlled, silent. When she stepped into the yard, Rafe was splitting wood. Lillian was rinsing jars at the pump. Cole was on the porch, half awake, cigarette hanging from his lips like an attitude. June said, "It's gone." Rafe's axe froze in midair. Lillian's hands paused under running water. Cole straightened, as if he'd been slapped. Rafe set the axe head down into the stump with slow care. "Tracks?" he asked. June nodded. "Fresh. Too many." Rafe stared past her into the tree line. "Then somebody had help," he said. Lillian's voice was quiet. "Who knows where it is?" Rafe didn't answer right away. Because answering meant admitting something nobody likes to admit in a family. That secrets don't only leak outward. Sometimes they leak through cracks inside the blood. Cole's voice came out sharp. "Tell me who," he demanded. Rafe looked at his son and said, flat, "First we get it back." That was the sentence that shifted the day from loss to motion. Because in the Ozarks, retrieving what's yours isn't a plan. It's a reflex. 14 names, 1 thread. The list wasn't written at the kitchen table. It was written in the shed behind the house, where tools hung on nails like old promises, and the air smelled faintly of oil and sawdust. Rafe stood at the workbench with a legal pad and a pencil. Wade leaned against the doorframe, watching the yard like he expected strangers to step out of the woods at any moment. June stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the paper. Cole paced. Fast. Angry. The kind of pacing that burns fuel without going anywhere. Lillian sat on an upturned bucket and said nothing, which was its own kind of pressure. Rafe wrote the first name. A scrap buyer who always wanted copper. Then a flatbed operator who hauled anything for cash. Then a drifter who traded gossip for cigarettes. Then a cousin by marriage who drank too much and talked like his words didn't cost anything. By the time Rafe hit 14, Cole stopped pacing. 14? Cole said. That's a lot. Rafe set the pencil down. It's a net, he replied. You pull one knot, the others tighten. June's voice came out low. What if it's fewer? Rafe's eyes stayed on the names. You don't move copper alone, he said. You don't hide it alone. You don't sell it alone. 14 men can touch one theft without ever lifting the pot. Lillian finally spoke. And when you find them? Rafe held her gaze a long moment, then said, We find our copper. And the rest? Lillian asked. Rafe's mouth tightened. Depends who lied. Wade watched him and understood what was happening beneath the words. This wasn't just retrieval, it was a reckoning. And reckoning has a way of growing teeth. The first body. 2 days later, the deputy found the dead man by the creek. His name was Hollis Wynne, a small-time hustler known for drifting between odd jobs and worse decisions. Not loved, but known. The murder itself wasn't described in town the way it would be on television. There were no details shared openly. People in the Ozarks don't pass around gore like entertainment. They passed around meaning. Hollis was found near where the old service road crossed the water, and on his fingertips, deputies noticed a faint dusting of copper residue, like he'd touched something valuable and hadn't washed. Sheriff Darrell Voss, elected twice, respected once, stood at the bank and stared at the copper shard in the mud. He didn't need a detective's imagination to connect the dots. A still goes missing. A man who talks too much ends up dead. Copper shows up like a breadcrumb, and a family known for guarding secrets suddenly has a reason to stop being patient. Sheriff Voss told his deputies, Keep your mouths shut. But the Ozarks isn't a place where silence can be ordered. It's a place where silence either holds or it breaks. And this one broke fast. By sundown, people were whispering the same question in different tones. Did Hollis die because he stole? Or because he knew who did? The motel key. Sheriff Voss didn't like the Turners. Not personally. He didn't dislike them either. He disliked what they represented, a parallel system of rules he couldn't fully control. But he also didn't want the state sniffing around his county like hounds. He didn't want reporters. He didn't want a story that turned his badge into a punchline. So he worked, quietly. He checked Hollis Wynne's pockets. He found a motel key, Highway Motel, room 4. He found a crumpled hardware receipt for rope, tarp, and a set of cheap work gloves. And he found something else, small but sharp, a cigarette butt in the ditch near Hollis's body. Not a local brand. Sheriff Voss drove straight to the motel, knocked on room 4, and got no answer. He spoke to the manager, got a ledger entry for 2 cash renters using names that didn't match any local IDs. One detail stuck. One of 'em limps, the manager said, like it was none of her business, but also completely her business. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Because limps are memorable. Limps are identifiers. Limps are threads you can pull. And in the Turners' world, pulling threads was already underway. Dale Mercer, again. The first link Rafe pulled was a man named Dale Mercer. Not because Mercer was the first suspect, because Mercer was the first fence. Mercer bought metal. Mercer asked questions. Mercer smiled like he was doing you a favor while he emptied your pockets. The Turner truck rolled into Mercer's scrapyard late afternoon. No drama, no revving, just gravel crunching under tires like a warning. Mercer stepped out of his scale house with that practiced grin. Rafe Turner, he called. What brings you down? Rafe got out slow and said, My copper. Mercer laughed lightly. You accusing me of something? Cole moved a half-step forward, anger leaking off him. Wade's hand went up, not touching Cole, just signaling him to hold. Rafe stared at Mercer. You've got a still in pieces somewhere, he said. Mercer's grin thinned. Prove it. June lifted a cigarette butt between 2 fingers, the one she'd found near the hollow. Who smokes this? She asked. Mercer's eyes flicked. A breath, a mistake. Then he shrugged. Could be anybody. Rafe leaned closer. "A man is dead in a creek," he said, "and coppers showing up like breadcrumbs." Mercer's voice cooled. "Get off my property." Rafe nodded once. "We will," he said. "But you hear me." Mercer's smile returned, brittle. "I hear you." Rafe turned away, but Wade saw what mattered. Mercer wasn't surprised. Mercer was calculating, meaning the still wasn't a random theft. It was planned, and planning meant more people, more moving parts, more chances for something to go wrong. In a story like this, wrong doesn't just mean caught. Wrong means dead. The net tightens. Over the next week, the Turners moved like a slow storm. They didn't hit all 14 names at once. They tapped them, one by one. A tire hauler admitted he'd loaned a flatbed to Mercer for cash. A mechanic admitted he'd seen copper coils in Mercer's shed behind the stacked cars. A drifter admitted Hollis Wynn had been bragging, saying he knew where the copper was going, saying he could get paid twice. June listened. Wade tracked. Cole simmered, and Rafe kept the pace controlled because he knew the hidden danger. If they moved too loud, the sheriff would clamp down. If they moved too slow, the copper would be stripped and sold. And if they moved too angry, Cole would do something irreversible. The turning point came on a damp Friday when June noticed something in the mud behind the general store. Boot prints. A distinctive tread. Local. She followed them to a familiar truck parked crooked. Cal Branson's. Cal wasn't just a local. He was family adjacent, a cousin by marriage, the kind of man who showed up at cookouts with a laugh and left with your secrets. June felt the cold truth settle. The hollow had been sold. Not by an outsider. By someone who knew exactly how deep that betrayal would cut. That evening, in the shed behind the Turner house, Rafe stared at Cal Branson across the workbench. Cal tried to smile, tried to charm, tried to talk his way out. Rafe didn't raise his voice. He just set a mud-smeared boot print cast on the bench beside the list. Then he laid down the motel key number the sheriff had found. Room 4. Then he laid down one simple sentence. "Who did you tell?" Cal's smile collapsed. He shook his head too fast. "I didn't—" Rafe didn't move. "I'm asking once." Cal swallowed. His eyes went wet, not with remorse, but with fear. "Mercer," he whispered. "He paid me. Said he just wanted copper. Said he wasn't going to hurt nobody." Cole lunged a half-step forward, fists clenched, and Wade caught his arm. Rafe's voice stayed flat. "A man is dead," he said. Cal flinched. "I didn't kill him." June's voice came out quiet as creek water. "Then why is he dead?" Cal's shoulders sagged. "Hollis heard me," he whispered. "He started talking big, started saying he could get paid. Mercer got scared." Rafe's eyes narrowed. "Mercer's got muscle." Cal nodded quickly. "Name's Curtis Vane," he said. "Big man. Used to bounce in Little Rock. He's the one who—" Cal stopped, breathing hard. Rafe didn't ask for gore. He didn't need it. He asked the only question that mattered now. "Where's the rest of the copper?" Cal hesitated, then broke. "Staghorn Bridge," he whispered. "River lot. Tonight. Mercer's meetin' buyers, out-of-towners, cash. He's moving the coil and whatever's left." Cole's eyes went bright with something dangerous. June felt the clock slam into place. Tonight, a location, an exchange, a point of no return. Rafe looked at Wade. "We go smart," he said. Wade nodded once. Rafe looked at June. "You stay close," he said. June's jaw tightened. "I'm already in it," she replied, and then Rafe looked at Cole. His son. His wildfire. Rafe's voice softened just a fraction. "You listen," he said. "No hero work." Cole didn't answer, but his breathing told the truth. In the Ozarks, the hardest thing to control isn't the enemy. It's your own blood. Staghorn Bridge. The river lot by Staghorn Bridge was the kind of place that looked harmless in daylight. A muddy pull-off, a few tire ruts, a stump used as a bench. At night, under low clouds, it felt like a stage built for mistakes. Rain started as a whisper, then thickened. Leaves shone. Mud turned slick. The Turners parked uphill, lights off, watching through a stand of trees. Minutes passed. Then headlights swept the lot. A truck rolled in and stopped near the water. Mercer climbed out, cigarette already in his mouth like confidence. Curtis Vane emerged from the passenger side, big, solid, scanning the tree line like a man trained to notice movement. They dropped a tarp-wrapped bundle in the mud. Even from a distance, June recognized the shape. The worm coil, or what was left of it. Another vehicle arrived, an older car, low and hesitant in the mud. Two men stepped out. Out-of-towners, clean jackets, nervous hands. One walked with a limp. June felt her stomach tighten. The same limp from the motel ledger, the same limp the manager remembered. The thread had been pulled, and here it was, tied into a knot. Mercer and the buyers spoke low. Cash flashed. Mercer's hand gestured toward the tarp. Curtis shifted, turning slightly to watch the woods again. His gaze passed near the Turners' hiding spot. Not on them. Close enough. Rafe's hand tightened on Cole's shoulder. Stay. Then a new set of headlights appeared, fast, coming down the road. A patrol car. Sheriff Voss. June's breath snagged, because now the story had too many hands on it. Mercer's posture changed instantly. Confidence snapped into urgency. He grabbed the tarp bundle, yanked it towards the truck bed. Curtis moved hard and quick, stepping between Mercer and the buyers like a shield. The limping buyer raised his hands, palms out. Mercer hissed something. Curtis reached into his jacket. June went cold. Gun. Cole shifted, half rising. Rafe whispered, fierce and low, "No." But Cole was already moving, not sprinting, just pushing through brush, boots slipping, anger turning him into momentum. June moved with him, because leaving Cole alone in that moment felt like letting the worst version of the night win. Wade cursed under his breath and followed. Rafe followed last, jaw clenched. Because once blood moves, you don't control it with wishes. They broke from the trees just as Sheriff Voss slid into the lot, tires throwing mud. Voss stepped out, hand raised, voice loud. "Everybody stay where you are!" Mercer didn't. Mercer yanked the copper harder like he could outrun consequences. Curtis drew the gun. The buyers shouted. The limping man stumbled backward. Cole's voice cracked the rain. "Drop it!" Curtis's head snapped toward Cole. For one breath, everything paused. Rain. River. Mud. 4 groups of men calculating the next second. Sheriff Voss's hand moved toward his holster. Curtis's gun lifted. Not fully aimed. Enough. Rafe stepped forward, voice like restraint stretched tight. "Curtis," he called. "Don't." Curtis's eyes flicked to Rafe. In that flicker, June saw what Curtis was. Paid muscle, not mastermind. Mercer barked, "Shoot him!" The sheriff shouted, "Gun down!" And then the shot came. One crack, sharp, final. The bullet hit metal, Mercer's truck bed, with a ringing clang and a brief spark that looked almost beautiful in the rain. Curtis stared like he hadn't meant to fire yet. The sheriff drew his gun. Curtis's arm twitched again. Cole lunged. Instinct. Pride. Rage. He slammed into Curtis's side, driving him into the mud. The gun fired again. Another crack. This time the shot tore through the tarp bundle. Copper screamed under impact. A bright flash. A harsh ringing. June grabbed Cole's shirt, pulling, trying to keep him from being the story's next corpse. Rafe arrived and wrenched Curtis's wrist with practiced force. The pistol clattered into mud. Sheriff Voss kicked it away and shouted, "Down! Everybody down!" Curtis lay pinned, breathing hard, defeated. The buyers dropped to their knees, hands up, faces pale. And Mercer. Mercer froze for the first time. His eyes darted like a trapped animal looking for a gap. He grabbed a wrench from the truck bed and swung it, not to hit, but to create distraction. The sheriff flinched. Mercer bolted for the river. June watched him run, boots slipping, arms flailing in wet darkness. He hit the bank and tried to scramble down toward a small boat tied to a stump. His foot slid. He grabbed a low branch. The branch snapped with a wet crack. And Mercer went into the river. The water took him hard. He surfaced once, gasping, then the current yanked him sideways toward the bend. Sheriff Voss ran to the edge, shouting his name. Rafe stood still, rain on his face, watching the water like he was watching judgment happen in real time. Mercer surfaced again, farther down, one hand reaching. Then he vanished behind the bend where the river turned mean. Silence hit the lot. Not peace, but shock. The sheriff stood at the bank, chest heaving, staring at black water. June realized her hands were shaking. Cole's eyes were wild, face streaked with mud and rain. Wade looked at Rafe as if asking, "Is this the end?" Rafe didn't answer. Because sometimes the Ozarks ends a story the way it ends a life. Quick. Cold. No closing statement. The massacre name. What happened next was messier, not in gore, in consequences. Sheriff Voss arrested Curtis Vane. The buyers were questioned for hours, then released with warnings that sounded like threats. The state wanted a story, clean, legal, contained. The county wanted the opposite, a story that didn't bring outsiders. And the Turners wanted their copper. The worm coil had a fresh bullet scar, a puncture that would need patching, a permanent reminder that metal can carry violence like memory. Rafe loaded what remained of the still into the truck. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He looked like a man bringing home something stolen from his own body. By the time dawn came, rumors were already forming. In some versions, Mercer didn't drown. He escaped and lived under another name. In others, the river swallowed him clean, and the hills felt satisfied. But the name that stuck, Massacre, didn't come only from Staghorn Bridge. It came from the weeks around it, from the way men on Rafe's list started disappearing from public view, from the way windows stayed dark in the daytime, from the way a few people left town suddenly without announcing it, from the quiet understanding that when you're connected to a chain like Mercer's, being not the killer doesn't always keep you safe. Sheriff Voss never publicly blamed the Turners for anything, but he didn't clear them either. He just kept his mouth shut, retired early, and moved to a county where rivers ran slower. And Cal Branson, the cousin who sold the hollow, left within days, not chased by law, chased by the way people looked at him in church. A look that said, "You touched something sacred, and now you don't belong." Cole left that summer. He told June on the porch one night, "I don't want to be the kind of man who tackles a gun in the mud." June watched him, voice quiet. "You already are," she said. Cole's jaw tightened. "Then I need to learn how to be something else." Rafe grew quieter with age. Not because he regretted bringing the copper back, because bringing it back proved a truth he didn't like. The biggest threat isn't always outsiders. Sometimes it's the crack inside your own circle. And once that crack opens, even if you patch the copper, you never fully patch the trust. Closing the loop. Years later, people would still describe that first morning like it was yesterday. Fog low in the holler. Flashlight beams cutting through it. That bright shard of copper pressed into creek mud like a deliberate breadcrumb. A body nearby, still and wrong. And the sense, immediate, unavoidable, that somebody had tried to turn a family's livelihood into a warning. If that was the plan, it worked, because the Turners answered. Not with speeches, not with sirens, with motion, with names, with a net tightened link by link, until the whole county felt it around its ribs. The still ran again by late summer. Clean runs, steady output. The hollow smelled like mash and smoke again. But the coil carried a scar. And the county carried a new kind of caution, like people had learned that the Ozarks doesn't just punish thieves. It punishes noise, it punishes arrogance, and it punishes anyone who mistakes copper for something ordinary. So here's the question the hills leave you with. Quiet, lingering, impossible to shake. If somebody stole the one thing keeping your family afloat, would you trust the law to return it? Or would you trust the Ozarks? And if you trusted the Ozarks, could you live with what the Ozarks demands in exchange? If you want, tell me in the comments. Was the Turner clan protecting their own? Or did the moment they made that list, the outcome was already set? And do you believe Mercer drowned? Or do you think people like that always find a way to resurface?